What's going on, workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And today we got into a conversation on stream, essentially talking about what is the level of personal responsibility that we have as gamers and that we can rightfully expect of the community when playing Final Fantasy XIV. So I thought we would have and kind of continue that conversation here. It was lively. It was very there's a
I
lots
was
of
not paying
emotion.
attention.
He was running Delirium Regana Goo, and we were all just talking in chat, and it was a really interesting conversation because, I didn't feel like anybody was wrong in their points, but I just have a perspective when it comes to this because I there's what I manage with myself, and then there's what then I expect of others, and that's kind of a driving force behind what we create here at Work to Game. And so I thought I'd give Chris opportunity to get caught up on this topic, essentially get the idea of what and get his perspective on it, because once he did get caught up on chat, we definitely, I don't think, agreed 100% on personal responsibility. But Chris, why don't you kind of jump in, and then we'll kind of back and forth this.
So I was running Deliverem, and I had set up the ability for people to bet their internet points on whether or not I could make it without taking vuln stacks. And so at one point I ran like 4 or 5 bosses in a row without making a single forced mistake. And so I was focused, and so I missed all of this. And I think seeing as I seemed like a neutral third party, and yet I do fall very much on one side of this, because then the next thing I did to take a break from that high tension is I went and did a Palace of the Dead run on Red Mage, which I have not touched since Stormblood, and I didn't level all the way to cap then, and so I didn't really know it then. I got a feel for it, and then I was running it now, and immediately it was clear, yeah, I'm just gonna pull something and just see what happens. And I messed up my rotation, and then I took all the abilities off the bar, and I added like 4 or 5, and then I pulled something else, and then I added one, and I pulled something else, and I was like, man, I feel like this, I feel like I'm almost dying. I did die a couple times, and they're like, well, why don't you just read your tooltips? And I think that's where it became clear, is that was what I feel like when I was kind of overhearing it. That's what it seemed like the debate was on.
Yeah.
Is where does that player responsibility fall? Because that means if I wanted to go queue in a roulette, I'm geared. I have gear for my black mage. I can just go drag that version of me playing red mage through other people's lives, not knowing what any of my abilities do and figuring it out as I go.
And so that brings up the question of what kind of solution the game can make. Because if you guys aren't aware, we'll get this comment, at least once every couple of weeks on a video in which that we, at least I spend time going over the just the tooltips of the abilities themselves and explaining what they do in relation to what other abilities are out there. And time again, we'll see the comment of why does this video exist? Don't people read their tooltips? And the answer is they don't. They do not.
Not everybody does. It's not that. The answer is that it's a split audience. Continue.
I was gonna say, you do, you mind, but I would say the vast majority actually don't. And so because I would say we are part of the engaged community. You watching these videos are part of the engaged community. So it's natural for us to automatically assume that everybody's on the same page that we are. But I would bet those fake internet channel points over on Twitch that we're the minority. We're the vocal minority when it comes to the content. And that's why those videos, do so well, but end up being helpful for somebody who might be busy, who might not be in the game. They might just be on their commute and they want to get a little extra, education about it. And so then they can kind of get some kind of context and then go in. And that's why those videos exist. But it was so funny because I was like, here's a great example of Chris knowing one thing and then going in blind. But on your blind run where you didn't read the tooltips and you haven't played it in a while, you were solo. You weren't impacting negatively anybody. The only person who can suffer, you could have been, but the only person suffering at that time. So that's kind of where I want to give the question, obviously, to you guys. What do you think about it? Because I stand that, my whole perspective on this entire discussion, this entire issue, because it is an issue, because it is a multiplayer game. Chris could have negatively impacted somebody's life, in a negative way, playing a video game. It happens
every time I come back from a break on the game.
Yeah.
I don't know how to play my warrior. That's my main. And I go, You know I'm supposed to have Storm's Eye equipped. I don't remember which one Storm's Eye is. Oh yeah, that's where it's bound.
And so for me, like I recognize that it's easy for us to sit here and say like, oh, it's easy for somebody to go and do this because it's easy for us. And so it's just a part of, I guess, how I've grown up, looking the fact that I've got kids. I go, the only person I can control in this entire crazy scenario, especially in a game, is myself. And that's where I can get match made with somebody who might not necessarily adhere to what I'm trying to accomplish, either be the best in my job or just generally like perform well for a group. And when all of the people in the party that get put together like have that same mindset, it's a beautiful thing. But I submit, and this is where I think Chris was disagreeing with me on the stream, I submit that a core aspect of this is that the game doesn't put in front of you how you're doing. And I'm not asking for a live DPS meter. I'm asking for generalized like statistics about your character and your performance over the course of, just generalize even what would be called normalized data. Like it's not saying here's how you did versus Chris. It's like here's how you do according to black mages, on your data center. You're kind of scoring in this thing. And the reason I submit that is that I think the idea that you should go outside the game to find the information so you can be better is one extra step that the majority of people don't make. But if you put some information in front of them, like even just like, hey, did you know you dropped Storm's Eye? Like if you look at Final Fantasy XIV analytics, it's such a helpful site, but it takes so many steps to get there. We're not catching the majority of people. And that's why a lot of the people who keep running into this friction in Duty Finder, if you put that, I still submit, if you put that in front of their face, like just a little bit of a taste, you're going to awaken something in them. Not everyone, not everybody. I'm not saying it's like, here's the cure all, but I would bet we would pick up another like chunk of individuals who are like, huh? I didn't know if I paired that together that I would end up outputting more damage. Let me do that. And then the game does not teach. It doesn't. No. And I wish it did. And that's what I'm trying to get at.
It only teaches one way. So when it does teach, it only teaches one way.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that the same news gets played on CNN, that gets published in the New York Times, that gets put out on Twitter, that gets summed up by Philip DeFranco. It's all the same freaking news. There are no new facts. It's the same news. Mm-hmm. But it gets covered by all these different sources because we don't all consume news the same way. We don't all use the same vocabulary. Mm-hmm. We don't all. Some prefer audio. Some prefer video. Some prefer reading. Some prefer hearing it from somebody more casual. Some prefer more of like a high-educated, high-minded vocabulary. And that's just how you. It's the very same information.
I like to meander around the Chardonnay. Mm-hmm.
I mean. You can mock it, but like there is something nice about the technical stuff.
Yeah.
When I was in medical, like there is something to be said for hearing like what is it in layman speak, but sometimes you pull up the white paper because it has details that the layman speak just doesn't. Mm-hmm. And so some people prefer to read white papers, and like that's not to mock those people, that's not to belittle them. Mm-hmm. Like everybody takes in the information to different degrees, and we all have so much going on in a day. And so imagine I only have an hour to play, and say I'm a slow reader and I don't like reading, and I don't feel that reading rewards me with anything, because there are some people who don't like reading but do it because they feel that it gets them to a goal, and I don't feel that way. I play video games because it's a visual media.
Yeah,
that seems like a reasonable assumption. And I hop in and somebody's like, well, you should read your tooltips. If I was going to read, I could go read a book. Like, I just want to play. And like, yes, it's only 1 or 2 sentences, but reading and comprehension are 2 different things. You don't just read each tooltip real quick once, and then it all falls together.
It's
and now you're doing a perfect rotation.
It's a comprehension.
It's a huge amount of processing. And maybe for people that have played games for 10 years, 20 years, where they've just naturally kind of been taught some of this stuff. Like none of us were born knowing how to play video games. None of us knew right click to interact. None of us knew what a gap closer was versus an invuln, or like nobody knows that stuff. That's all learned behavior. And so I think the frustration here is in the gap, and then the fact that in an MMO, your play style, right? And if it's done by an objective measure, something like DPS, you're doing less DPS or more DPS than me, affects my gameplay.
Right.
So that's where the rub is that we're playing a multiplayer game, and we all have expectations, and we're sharing a reality. at least for the duration of that instance.
Well, and I think that when you look at how the game is, and you and I have kind of talked about this topic in a couple different ways before, when it comes down to like the individual player, and then I think essentially where I was definitely in disagreement with some of the individuals in chat was that it's fine to sit here and expect that somebody is going to come to your party and they're going to have done the things that you want, but that's not the reality. And so I'm dealing with, like, I deal with, and my solution has been to make guides to help people close that gap. But it's still asking somebody to go out into another medium, to Google, and to find. And there are people who do that. And that is awesome. And that's why, one of the reasons probably why somebody might be watching this video specifically. But that all being said is that at the core of it, there's still like a group of people that you could get matched with. And even though you have that expectation, they're just off doing their own thing. And the game is never kind of inviting them to go deeper, because there also isn't a real challenge that they're going to meet that's going to require that. Like, I would submit that, like in your case with Red Mage, you go and you fire it off, you haven't read the tooltips, you get just decimated, and you're like, how can I fix that? And so then you go and you learn and you figure out how to fix it, because it actually presents to you a challenge. But if your spellcast just wiped everything out, one shot everything, you're going to keep pressing I press this button to win. Like, there's an inherent, I think, design in the game itself that isn't necessarily kind of encouraging that gap, closing that gap, because the stair step in the difficulty is so dramatic that most of the people who, they just kind of bow out. Even if they end up falling into that mid-tier, mid-core level, they're like, savage, I don't got time for that.
Even in your example, you're assuming that I'm an adult with the desire to clear the content and the ability to measure that.
That's true.
I mean, I listened to Preach told a whole story the other day about this guy who was frustrated that his friend's 6-year-old had better gear than him. And he watched her play, and she just went into groups and just pressed abilities and ran in circles. She had no comprehension and was rewarded and cleared the content. Mm-hmm. And I cannot imagine how frustrating it was for everybody that was in all her parties. But she was pushing mythic keys in WoW by just being awful and joining enough groups that somebody carried her, and she was having a blast with no desire to improve.
Makes me think
no desire to read tooltips.
Yeah.
No, just running forward and just pressing the same ability over and over and over. And like, so you're already assuming that we have something in common as far as like our goals and our measure of what success is. And like, it's possible they already feel they're crushing it.
Yeah. They'd be like,
I'm doing great. In, I killed the boss 3 out of the last 4 times I did it. That was great. I don't need to change anything. It's going great.
So I guess the question would be is that, what would be our preferred system in which that the game would help to encourage and close that gap in terms of, okay, yeah, you're not going to go read tooltips. Like, are we advocating for maybe like a hall of the intermediate, a hall of the expert, some system of trials, almost like what we have with Blue Mage? Because I know the DPS question, like, that sets off a whole debate versus because it always just falls down to toxicity, which is, I think, a proven like kind of stereotype when it comes to meters. Toxic people will be toxic. You don't need to worry about a meter. We've established where we stand there. But would it be something like a set of trials, a Blue Mage set of trial, like for every job? Like, what would be your ideal situation that kind of help encourage some more self-improvement in the game?
I think mostly just looking at this as a big picture and being glad we're not the devs, because like in all honesty, they have a really hard job. They can't spend unlimited resources tackling this. So as you try to bring new players on board, right? If the first method costs you X amount of dollars in dev time and catches 60% of the population, do you develop a second method? And if you do, you spend another chunk of money and time to maybe catch another 20%. So now you're at 80%. Like, you're never going to catch everybody.
Right.
And so it's how far are you willing to spend resources to go down this road And each one has to be presented in a different way to catch a different group of people, has to be translated to all the different languages, done with a localization team, updated for patches. What happens when rotations change? What happens when we prune abilities? How do we go back and teach this? Do we teach it by role? Do we teach it by job? As we expand the number of jobs, does this system scale in some way? How does it adjust when we talk about things like gearing? Does the mechanics change? Do we go back and teach updated mechanics for the different types of things? Deliverum takes a lot of familiar ideas, but now the donut is moving and so on. Like, where does all of this get taught? It's a huge problem, and there would never be enough things that, like, at some point you're just going to toss people into the deep end. At some point you're just going to let them loose, and there's going to be people that don't swim. Like, that's just the nature of it. And so you have to ask yourself, so I think from a business standpoint you have to ask, is it making people quit? Is it making people to quit that we let people into content that are bad? Is it making the people that are bad struggle and say, I hate this, and they quit? Are we losing money at this?
Right.
Because that's really when you would want to spend more. And so, like, would I love for there to be more video format? Sure. I mean, it kind of puts us out of business, but yeah, make video content in game. Like, would I love there to be Hall of the Novice, like see one, do one, teach one? Absolutely. Would I love a mentor system that somehow, I don't know how, magically made mentors that actually wanted to help other people? And you don't see these people posting these things on Twitter bio that, like, where their bio says, you know, mentor, and then don't ask me questions, like straight up in their bio, like, don't talk to me, I'm doing this for the crown. And like, so would I love for there to be some magical solution where we all get better at the game and slowly improve over years, and we realize that it's okay that I'm playing with Brian on year 1 knowing that he'll get to year 10, and I know he's bad today but I'm willing to invest, and we all have infinite patience? Absolutely. It's a world full of rainbows, but I think the reality is to look at this and say it's a huge issue, and it's back to your point, all I can control is me.
Yeah, and so that's why we're like, I'm dropping phones on the ground. And that's why I think for me, one of the things, like, while I kind of presented a couple of ideas, and we've talked about meters and we've talked about these things before, I'd like to take this in kind of a different direction. And it comes down into kind of more like community-driven tools within the game. We talk about our free company. We talk about like our link shells. Like, these are all kind of systems that are somewhat set apart and divided. And so, like, free companies can only exist on like one server. Link shells are now cross server. You know, there's no calendar system. And I think essentially one of the things that would help just kind of take somebody from, like, I'm just kind of here doing my thing, into like a bigger part of the community, which I think helps drive that investment. Because if you're invested, if I know I'm playing with Chris, if I know I'm playing with my friends, I'm going to either try to get better, or they're going to carry me and we're going to all talk crap and laugh about it and at least have a good time. I think the core issue comes back to actually matchmaking. When you matchmake in a PvE environment, you're kind of saying, like, I'm going to accept every, you know, whatever you give me. And then a part of this conversation was, I'm mad with what you gave me, but I did agree to these terms. And there's no, like, almost a way, like, it says, like, hey, by the way, like, this is going to match you with somebody who's like a savage raider and they're going to be like serious and you're going to get this knocked out in 5 minutes, or with somebody who's going to run around in circles and they're not going to press a single, like, a button. You never know who you're getting. Do you agree to these terms, to drive more of a communal driven aspect? If I sit here and take Chris, if I sit here and take 2 people from like you Work to Games Discord, and boom, we've got our 4-man. Hey, here we're going. And you know what? We have a personal relationship. So if you're not necessarily performing so well, like, we might, like, hey, have you tried using this ability? And it's less offensive than when you try to tell some rando that. Because I haven't seen that, like, hey, by the way, if you put on this thing, you know it works, right? You know, as opposed to, that doesn't ever seem to be a conversation that just, you know, lauds like, thank you very much. I didn't know.
It's easier to invest in somebody else, right? I was hanging out in chat last night while editing a video, and a member of the community was having trouble finding a quest giver. And I Googled it and I poured it in game and I told them how to get there, and I joined up in their party. So I was standing where the quest giver was, so they could just run to my dot, because they were returning to the game and they were just a little lost. And it's frustrating when you're like, I just want to get back to the gameplay. And you've taken the effort to install your client, update your client. You've gone out to the lodestone and you know, the MOG station and the 9 million different websites they have to reactivate your account. And you've done all this, and then you log in and you're like, okay, I want to try out this, you know, I want to do this thing. Where's the quest? And it's just like, it's just one more thing. And like, it took me a minute and a half to boot up the game, log in. It was no big deal. but like I can't do that for the entire internet at large. Like it's just not that scalable. And so like communities is probably the best answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it sucks that the game, because it's a game issue, but like I want to say that in a way where I'm not saying the game could fix it.
Yeah.
It's an unfixable core issue with all games.
Yeah, and I think that's why like in my mind, I would love to see more community features that help people get connected, because that connection,
we can make it better.
That connection I think takes from a development cost perspective. I think it's much easier to do something like, hey, we've added this system that is timeless and actually helps, not like doesn't solve one issue, but could solve like or add features that more people could enjoy. But in turn, and Yoshi P kind of floated this idea about circles like to us at the media tour. So I'm wondering if that's going to come into the future, which sounds exciting. Like if you think of like you have a graduating class, you know,
the
it's
rough
like,
idea was like a graduating class.
Yeah.
Like I joined the game in May of 16 and there's this group of people and I can see where they're at. And it's like, oh man, one of them just got the last extreme mount. I should do that.
Exactly.
We've been playing the same amount of time.
Yeah. And so like the ability to kind of have some kind of, you start with kind of like, if you think of like layers of a circle or layers of an onion, like as you get like to be able to sit here and say, yeah, like here's like just my core server, and then it gets deeper and deeper and hopefully creating some real connection. And so then people can find ways to then say, hey, I want to get better because I'm actually invested in you. And that's one of the things that the reason why I came to that conclusion is when Julie and I would play together, she wouldn't try to like DPS, like she'd have me parse her, not so that she would know, but so she could make sure that she's doing the best that she can for that group, for me, for like you're personally invested. You want to have that attitude. And I think that's where it comes down into. If someone's just kind of like treating this like a single player game, they're going to just treat it like a single player game. And if the game doesn't like punch them in the face, not the players, don't punch anybody. But if the game doesn't punch them in the face, like there's no necessarily for them getting better. And so that creates all kinds of design decisions. And I think the best thing is like, if you find a friend, you're going to try to be better. You're going to try to work harder for that friend. And that's where I think that's kind of what helps close that gap, even if only by maybe a percentage. You know, I think it's essentially an improvement, and that's where I think it would ultimately help and better the game overall. But that's just my thoughts. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and then I think that to expand on that, all the development responsibility is, right? All we can see long-term from Yoshi P and his team is to get out of the way.
Yeah.
So if there's something that's forming and there's an element of the game that's actively stopping that from happening, get that out of the way. So like, cross data center is one of those things, right, where the community is starting to form and somebody's like, oh, I found this person and I want to play with them and they want to invest in me, and then they can't,
right?
Like that, those barriers getting removed is what allows. So because the community, we can't be expected to just overcome everything. You can't just have an entire game that's powered by altruism, because then when people get tired of helping other people, you run into a castrum issue. But like they go in and they push the rewards up a little bit. They make it easier, you know, maybe they make it easier to find groups. Maybe one day they move something like, maybe all things like Castrum are now like Deliverum, where they're done through Duty Finder. Way better.
Yeah.
Way better. Get technical things out of the way and then just let people invest in each other.
Yeah.
Because we have a community where you can see in chat, like, I love this game. And somebody else is like, I love you. And like, it's just so happy. And it's like, just get back to that.
Yeah.
We've gotten pretty good at swinging the banhammer at people that come in to ruin it. So like, I wouldn't worry about that, because this game is, if anything, overzealous about banning people. So like, don't be fearful about that banhammer. It is very real.
Yeah.
So like, I think cross data center is what gives me hope that more of this will take place in the future. Deliverum being done through where I can pre-form a group is what gives me more hope that the future of this will be easier and easier and easier.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps it up for this video, guys. As always, let us know what you think about any of these ideas that we've got. Share your own as well. We'll continue the conversation. And obviously, if you guys aren't aware and you're not active on the official forums and you have a really good idea, be sure to go post it over there. And also, don't worry about any hate that people give you, because posting on the forums can be a scary place. But just note that the devs don't care if people try to flame you for your idea. They're going to take it. They'll bring it to the devs and go from there. So anyway, that's going to wrap it up for Work to Game. My name is Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks so much for watching. We hope to see you next time. But until then,
take care.